7 brutal tests across 2 dimensions, only 1% of dark chosen ones pass. Have you ever wondered what lies beyond the veil of ordinary perception? Beyond the surface of what we call reality. In this world, and in the worlds that overlay ours, there are 2 dimensions not taught in any school or revealed in any religious text. These are not places, but states of being. They are frequencies of consciousness that only the chosen ones, those born with the seed of darkness, not as evil, but as depth, can even begin to perceive. And among those, only 1% pass the 7 brutal tests that guard the gates between illusion and gnosis. I didn't believe it either at first. I was like you, curious, skeptical, even afraid. But I was called. Perhaps you are too. Because if you're still listening, you already know something inside you is not satisfied with shallow truths. There's a hunger, a whisper, a shadow that follows you in silence. And that shadow is not your enemy. It is your test.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
The first test is what I call the mirror of infinite depths. The moment it begins, nothing in your life remains untouched. But you are shown yourself not the version you post on social media, not the mask you wear for approval, but the unfiltered, raw soul underneath. Every lie you told to survive, every time you betrayed your inner voice, then every dream you buried because it was too painful to believe in it, all floats to the surface like ink in clear water. This mirror doesn't show you what you look like. It shows you who you are when no one is watching. Ask yourself this now: what would you see if every thought you ever had was projected onto a screen? Would you still love yourself? You can't pass the first test by effort. You don't conquer the mirror, you surrender to it. You let it burn you. You let it destroy every false layer. And in that destruction you start to see the first gate open. But most fail here not because they're weak, but because they're too attached to the image of who they think they are. You see, ego is a fortress. It was built to protect you from pain, but it also keeps out transformation. And so, the mirror becomes unbearable. Many run. Some numb themselves. Others convince themselves they've already passed. That self-awareness is enough. But the chosen ones, those who are forged in the fire of truth, they stay. They face the abyss and say, "Show me more." When I went through this, I spent 11 days in darkness. No light, no sound, no distraction. Just me and the mirror. I saw things I had buried so deep I forgot they ever happened. I remembered the first time I lied to myself, but the first time I gave up on something important because I was afraid. And I wept not out of shame, but out of recognition. I had forgotten who I was. That's what the mirror does, it reminds you. But it doesn't do it gently. It tears away every illusion. And if you survive it, you begin to see that the darkness inside you is not evil. It's depth. It's potential. It's the part of you that refuses to be shallow, that refuses to lie, that refuses to live a life that isn't real. After the mirror, the second test begins. It's called the silence between worlds. But before we go there, I want you to ask yourself something. When was the last time you were truly silent, not just externally, but internally? Can you even remember what it feels like to be without distraction, without noise, without the constant chatter of thoughts and fears and plans? This test takes place in the second dimension, what I call the hidden current. It's not visible to the eyes. It's not accessible through science or logic. It's felt. It's a vibration that runs beneath everything. But once you've passed through the mirror, you start to hear it. A hum, a rhythm, a presence. But to hear it clearly, you must become silent. Not just in your mouth, but in your mind, in your body, in your energy. And that's when it begins to get brutal. Because silence is not peaceful. It is violent at first. All the noise you've suppressed begins to scream. You realize how much you're addicted to distraction. How much you use your phone, your relationships, your work, everything to avoid being alone with yourself. True silence is like standing naked in a storm. It strips you, it exposes you, and then, if you stay long enough, it initiates you. During my silence, I encountered what I can only call the second voice. It wasn't mine, it wasn't kind, it didn't comfort me. It challenged me. It asked questions that shattered my worldview. Why do you fear death when you haven't even lived? What would you do if no one ever approved of you again? What is your purpose when no one is watching? This voice doesn't speak to those who are still clinging to the surface. It comes only when the silence has become unbearable. And when it comes, it doesn't give answers. It gives riddles. It gives you yourself, but from another dimension. A version of you that remembers. A version of you that cannot be lied to. And here's the terrifying part. You begin to feel that you are not alone. That something ancient has always been watching. That your entire life has been a preparation for this moment. And that you are being weighed not by a god, not by society, but by your own soul. Most people fail the second test because they cannot endure the silence long enough to hear the voice. They panic, they flee, they make noise just to feel alive. But the 1%, the dark chosen ones, they do not run. They listen, they allow the silence to consume them. And in that consumption, they find something incredible, awareness. Not the kind of awareness that makes you feel good, and the kind that breaks you. The kind that shows you how asleep you've been, how programmed, how afraid. And yet, after the silence, something shifts. You begin to feel your power. Not the power of control, but the power of surrender. You realize that the silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of truth, full of guidance, full of presence. And so you step forward, not because you want to, but because you must, because the next test is calling. And you know now this path was never a choice. It was a remembering. But before we continue, let me ask you something that only you can answer. If everything you believed about yourself turned out to be a lie, and would you have the courage to start over? The labyrinth of shadows, where your greatest fear becomes your greatest teacher. When we step through the veil of silence, we do not emerge into light. We descend deeper into the labyrinth of shadows. This is not a metaphor. It is a psychological, emotional, and spiritual terrain that surrounds every human being, though most never walk it consciously. But if you've passed the mirror and survived the silence, the labyrinth finds you. And you must enter, not as a warrior, not as a hero, but as a student of fear. In this dimension, fear is not an enemy. It is a guide, a mentor, a brutal teacher that does not care about your comfort, only your evolution. The labyrinth is constructed from the echoes of every moment you avoided, every trauma you buried, every truth you refused to face. You don't walk its halls, you become them. Each turn is a part of your psyche. Each dead end is a belief that no longer serves you. Each monster is your own shadow, wearing the mask of someone else. I remember the first chamber I entered. It showed me a scene from my childhood, one I had long forgotten. I saw myself trembling, crying in a room with no one coming to help. And I felt it not as a memory, but as a full-body experience. The helplessness, the abandonment, the belief that love was conditional. That to be safe, I had to become what others wanted. The labyrinth didn't explain this. It made me relive it. And in doing so, it showed me the root of my adult fears, my need for validation, my fear of rejection, my addiction to performance. You see, in the labyrinth, there is no escape through logic. You don't get to think your way out, you feel your way through. And that is what makes it so brutal. Because most of us have been trained to avoid feeling, to numb, to distract, to analyze. But here, your only way forward is through the raw sensation of pain, confusion, terror, and eventually, liberation. The dark chosen ones understand this. They do not resist the shadows. They befriend them. They listen. They ask, "What are you here to teach me?" And the shadows answer not in words, but in visceral realizations. But suddenly, the betrayal you experience becomes the gateway to self-respect. But the heartbreak becomes the path to inner union. The failure you couldn't forgive becomes the catalyst for your purpose. But this transformation is not guaranteed. Many are lost in the labyrinth. They mistake the shadows for enemies and fight them endlessly, only to find themselves going in circles. Others try to rush through, bypassing the lessons, only to be dragged back to the beginning. The labyrinth has no patience for arrogance. It rewards only those who surrender to the process. There was one moment I'll never forget. I stood in front of a door that wouldn't open. I had faced a dozen shadows already. I thought I had done the work, but the door remained closed. Then I heard it not with my ears, but with my entire being. "You have not faced the fear of being nothing." And that realization hit me like thunder. Beneath all my spiritual seeking, my achievements, my identity, there was a terror of being insignificant, of being forgotten, of not mattering. I dropped to the ground. I wept, not because I was sad, but because I saw the root of my striving. And in that moment I accepted it. I let myself be nothing, just breath, just presence, just awareness. And without effort, the door opened. This is the secret of the labyrinth. Your greatest fear is not there to destroy you, it's there to free you. But only if you let it teach you. Only if you stop running and start listening. And so I ask you now, what fear has been following you your entire life? What shadow have you refused to face because you thought it would break you? What if it's the very thing that will make you? The third test is unlike anything before it. But it is not about facing the self or the past. It is about dissolving the self entirely, about merging with something ancient, vast, and terrifyingly beautiful. But the ocean of dissolution, where the self dies and the soul remembers. Beyond the labyrinth, there is no path. There is only water, not physical water, but a boundless, all-consuming presence that feels like drowning in something older than time itself. The third brutal test begins here in the ocean of dissolution. It is here that the last fragments of who you thought you were are taken from you, not by force, but by immersion. This is the test where the ego has no place to cling, where identity dissolves like salt in infinite depths. And if you are not ready, you will resist. But resistance here is not defiance, it is death. Not physical death, but the death of awakening. When I first entered this dimension, I thought I was prepared. I had faced my shadows, endured the silence, torn through the mirror. But nothing could have prepared me for the feeling of being completely erased. There were no visions, no voices, no lessons, just a vastness so complete, so unbound, that it made every thought feel like a scream in a cathedral. I couldn't find myself. I tried to remember my name, my mission, my story, but none of it mattered. None of it existed. In the ocean of dissolution, the self becomes irrelevant. And that is the point. You see, everything we've built, our identities, our values, our beliefs, are scaffolding. They help us function, but they are not who we are. They are only costumes worn by consciousness. And in this ocean, those costumes are stripped away, one thread at a time. You might think that sounds peaceful. It's not. It's terrifying. Because what remains when there is no you left to hold on to? The truth. What? Oh. The soul does not speak in words. It does not argue or justify or explain. It simply is. And in the ocean, that is what you become. Not a person but presence. Not a seeker but the sought. Not a story but the stillness between stories. And in that stillness you remember not with your mind, but with your being. You remember the silence before your first breath. You remember the light behind every shadow. You remember that you were never alone. You remember that you are the ocean. This is not metaphor. This is awakening. But most fail this test because they fight to stay themselves. They cling to their roles, their traumas, their spiritual identities. Even their pain becomes sacred to them. But the ocean does not care who you were. It only asks, are you willing to become nothing so that you can become everything? I floated in that space for what felt like centuries. Time didn't exist there. Only awareness. I saw flashes of other lives, other forms I had taken, not as fantasies, but as echoes. I saw all the people I had hurt, all the ones I had loved, all the versions of me that had tried and failed and tried again. And I forgave them all. I forgave me. Because in the ocean, forgiveness is not an act. It is a natural state. When there is no separation, there is no blame. There is only flow. Eventually, something shifted. Not because I did something, but because I stopped doing everything. But I surrendered completely, not just in thought, but in essence. And then the ocean gave me back to myself. Not the self I had been, but the self I had always been becoming. And I ask you this now, not lightly, but as one who has been there, are you willing to let go of everything you believe about yourself, even your highest truths, if it means touching what is eternal within you? Because after this, after the ocean, there is no going back. The next test is not about you at all. It is about what you do with you, about how you return to the world bearing the fire of awakening without being consumed by it. The trial of return, where power meets humility and destiny is forged. The final and most brutal test of all does not begin in silence or shadow, nor in the dissolving depths of the ocean. It begins the moment you return. You've passed through fire, faced your fears, and tasted the truth of your soul. And now, the universe asks the most difficult question of all: what will you do with everything you've seen? This is the trial of return, and it is deceptive because it doesn't feel like a test. It feels like coming home, back to the world of noise and names, of people and problems, of clocks and currency. But you are no longer the same. You've touched something sacred. You've remembered something ancient. And now the world feels dull, shallow, distracting. And this is where most of the 1% fall. The real danger isn't in the silence or the darkness. It is in the light of normal life. The return is where you can forget again. You're surrounded by people who never stepped into the mirror, who never heard the second voice, who never drowned in the infinite. And they will pull you back not out of malice, but out of familiarity. They will want you to be who you were. And if you are not anchored in what you've become, you will obey. You will shrink. You will perform. That's why the return is the hardest test. Because now you must live your truth in a world that rewards the lie. You must carry the sacred through the mundane. You must speak without preaching, walk without floating, serve without superiority. But you must be the bridge between two dimensions, between noise and stillness, between illusion and knowing. I remember walking into a crowded city for the first time after my awakening. I saw everyone moving so fast, chasing things they didn't even want, believing things they hadn't questioned, and I wanted to scream. But the ocean had taught me screaming would change nothing. But presence would. Stillness would. Compassion would. So I became the quietest person in every room. And from that stillness, people began to awaken not because of what I said, but because of what I was. This is the paradox of the final test. You are given immense power not to control, but to influence, not to dominate, but to elevate. And the test asks, can you hold this power without ego? Can you lead without needing followers? Can you teach without needing to be seen? The dark chosen ones who pass this test are not the ones with the most knowledge. They are the ones with the deepest humility. They know the darkness they've walked through. They know the mirror can return at any time. They know silence is always listening. And so they walk quietly, love deeply, and serve endlessly because they remember. They remember the labyrinth. They remember the ocean. They remember who they are without all the masks. And now I ask you, with everything you've heard, everything you've felt, are you willing to live in a world that doesn't recognize your transformation, and still honor it every day? Are you strong enough to be gentle? Brave enough to be quiet? Wise enough to be ordinary? Because that is the true mark of the 1%. They don't need to prove they've passed the tests. Their presence proves it. Their lives embody it. And their silence speaks louder than any words ever could. You are being called not to escape the world, but to return and transform it from within. That is not a metaphor. It is your destiny. The tests are real. The tests are brutal. The tests are sacred. And if you're still here, perhaps, just perhaps you were chosen too.